I'm Brandon Staglin, and this is One Mind Brainwaves. Welcome. Thank you for watching.
I'm living my best life. I wake up with the sunrise. It does not look a thing like I thought that it would, but I've been getting my steps in.
So today we continue our ongoing look at the growing field of psychedelic science and the potential of psychoactive compounds to treat serious mental health conditions. We'll introduce you to one of our newest One Mind Compass Rising Star awardees, Dr. Alex Kwan of Cornell University, whose research focuses on the use of psilocybin, otherwise known as magic mushrooms, to treat depression and is breaking new ground. I want to thank Compass Pathways for the generous sponsorship of Alex's Rising Star Award, as well as those of his two compatriots in our Rising Star cohort this year. And I want to say, however, that each September, One Mind brings together acclaimed musicians, leading scientists, and passionate brain health advocates to put on our music festival for brain health in Napa Valley, California. The music festival raises money for brain health research and sparks critical conversations like the one we're going to have today with Dr. Alex Kwan. He will be a featured speaker at the music festival this year. So if you come, you can see him. The music festival will take place on September 10th this year, as I mentioned, at Staglin Family Vineyard in Napa Valley, California. And tickets are still available, so if you are quick, you can get some. To register and purchase, visit music-festival.org. Here's a sneak peek. With me now is Dr. Alex Kwan, an associate professor in the Meinig School of Biomedical Engineering at Cornell University. He's also recently just named a 2022 One Mind Compass Rising Star Awardee for his groundbreaking work in psilocybin research and how that can be applied for people struggling with depression. He'll be talking about that with us today. Alex, thank you for joining us on Brainwaves today. Welcome.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here.
Great to see you, and congratulations on your award.
Thank you.
Well deserved. Viewers, don't forget, we want to hear from you too. If you have any thoughts or comments you want to add to the conversation, feel free to post them in the chat section of this webcast at any time, or any stories you'd like to tell, that'd be fine on the web chat as well. Also, if you know of anyone who might benefit from the information we're sharing in this webcast today, please share it with them. Thanks so much. So Alex, I've been fascinated to learn more about your award and the work you're planning to do with it, but let's start with kind of a broad overview of the field. We've been examining the incredible potential of psychedelic science here on the show over the last few months. And in fact, last month we featured Katya Melyevskaya of Compass Pathways, who talked about the great work they're doing there. But I'd love to learn more about the nature of your research at the Kwan lab and how it's helping and expand our knowledge about psychoactive compounds and how they can be used to treat serious mental health conditions like depression. Can you please explain a bit about the research you do at the Kwan lab?
Of course. So I run a basic neuroscience lab at Cornell University. My lab, we're very interested in finding new treatment options for depression, with a particular focus on how antidepressive drug work. So some of the compounds that we have studied in the lab are ketamine, psilocybin, and 5-methoxy-DMT, compounds that really have shown a lot of therapeutic potential for treating depression in humans. But again, we're a basic neuroscience lab, so we're more interested in the mechanism of action for how these drugs work. For example, we want to know how these drugs may change the connectivity between neurons, how they connect with each other and communicate with each other. We want to know how these compounds might change the brain activity, like how we might fire, neurons might fire. And then ultimately, we want to know how these changes at the cellular level might translate into behavioral changes that might be responsible for those antidepressant action. Overall, I think even though we know that they have these therapeutic potential, I think we know very little about how these drugs work in terms of what they do to the neural circuits in the brain. And we think that, uncovering some of those mechanisms of action will be quite important if we want to identify a new drug, if we want to discover new compounds that might be safer and more effective medications.
That's fantastic. So developing ways to understand how these compounds that we know about already are actually working, kind of reverse engineer ways to produce better compounds or safer compounds, could really get right to the heart of what people need with their mental health conditions like depression, for example. Wonderful. So what inspired you to focus your research on this area of medicine? What particularly drove you to focus on psilocybin for depression?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, my lab is at Cornell right now, but previously I was a faculty at the Yale School of Medicine for 9 years before I moved to Cornell. And Yale was really the place where it was discovered that ketamine was an antidepressant. So there was a lot of activity there, and I have some firsthand experience just seeing how clinicians can work with basic scientists together that lead to many exciting discoveries and actually drive over many years ketamine from laboratory into clinic. And I was involved in some of that ketamine work as well. But towards the end, when it really finally, before it get approved, we were as a lab also looking for some other opportunities. Examples of other areas where, like ketamine, where there could be also therapeutic potential. And then we were very inspired by some early results with psilocybin from places like Imperial College and Johns Hopkins University. And we decided that, I think it would be fantastic to have an improved basic understanding for how psychedelic work, in particularly psilocybin. And we think that, again, the combination of that basic and clinical work could potentially really accelerate the development of that drug.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I would say that's really the impetus for how we got involved in it.
That's wonderful. And love to hear more about how you combine the basic and the clinical science to really drive the discoveries forward faster. Can you expand a little on that, please?
Yeah, so I think we still know very little about what psychedelics do to the brain at the cellular level in terms of neurons and neural circuits. We know a little bit about how they bind to certain receptors and a little bit about how they act on human brain through things like neuroimaging, but again, very little at the cellular level. And there really has been a long gap in research as well, right? Because the study of these compounds has been stopped for a number of years. But since then, neuroscience has progressed tremendously. Now there are new imaging technologies, new recording technologies, and really try to get deep into what these compounds do. So in my lab, we're using one of these newer technologies, particularly optical imaging, where we use lasers to image in fine detail individual neurons in the brain. So what we do in the lab is we can administer a drug like psilocybin to a mouse, and then we can use these microscopy techniques to look at how it changes the morphology, structure, and also functions of neurons inside a mouse's head. So last year, we published one study where we were specifically looking at connections between neurons, and we asked how psilocybin could modify those neuronal connections. And what we found was quite striking. We found that given one single dose of psilocybin, we see approximately 10% increase in the number of neuronal connections within the mouse's head. And what was even more unexpected was how long that increase lasts. So we see that increase lasts up to about a month later when we go back to look at the same place in the mouse's head. So again, I think there's a lot of interest for how these compounds like psilocybin could exert fairly long-lasting potential therapeutic benefits. And I think that these structural changes in the brain, these added neural connection, could be one mechanism for how that might come about.
Wow, that is truly amazing. Think about how so many new connections in the brain could be formed by at least in a mouse, by a single dose of psilocybin, and what that might mean for humans in the clinical setting down the line if those technologies can be applied for people. So you talked a little bit about the effects that psilocybin and ketamine have on the brain. Well, particularly psilocybin just now, but can you expand on that a little? Like, you're expanding our knowledge of how they work, but how much do we really know about how they work currently?
Yeah, again, I would say we don't know as much about what they do to neurons, in the sense that again, we know a little bit about what receptor they bind to, thanks to some good work from people from, for example, University of North Carolina, with that now the crystal structure, the receptor binding to the drug. But again, we just don't know what they do to neurons. Yeah, how they change the morphology and structure of neurons over time in terms of neurons input and output, how they change the activity pattern. Ultimately, our brain gives rise to behavior because these neurons are firing and active, and that's what drives the behavior. And we know very little about what psychedelics do in those contexts. So those are, again, just big questions. I think the whole field is doing it, but also some of interest of my lab.
That's wonderful. So much left to learn and to discover around these compounds and how they can help people hopefully down the line. How will the funding that you receive from the Rising Star Award help you to advance this knowledge? What exactly do you plan to do with that award to make discoveries for benefiting people down the line?
Going back to that study that I talked about last year, where we found that psilocybin can increase the number of neural connection in the mouse brain, we thought that was a very exciting finding, but there's still a lot that we don't know even about that result. One of the key questions was that, okay, now you can increase the neural wiring, but what type of connections are those that we're actually increasing? Specifically, what brain regions do those connections connect to? So with this Rising Star Award, I was hoping to conduct a series of experiments. We can use different methods to try to learn more about those new connections. What part of the brain area the communication is being strengthened. And then also, if we can figure out which circuitry are involved, then perhaps we can even try to stimulate or perturb those circuitry while administering psilocybin. We might be able to induce even more plasticity and maybe boost some of the beneficial effects. So those are some of the long-term, maybe some a pipe dream right now, but I'm pretty excited about this project, and I think high risk, high reward type of project.
Yeah, that's so cool. And when you talk about kind of augmenting the effect of psilocybin with other interventions that could, really boost the effects, I was thinking about something you had said a moment before about how they formed new connections with different circuits in the brain. And from my reading about music and mental health, apparently music, playing music can like create lots of different connections that are not normally leveraged in the brain. I wonder if there's any way to combine artistic based therapies or neuroaesthetics with psilocybin or other psychoactive compounds, like other psychedelic compounds like that. Has there been any work done in that area that you know of?
I think there's definitely opportunity in that area. As you might know too, I think the setting is very important for some of the effects of these compounds. By set, you mean you're talking about the external environment. The set, I mean the internal state, but the setting means the external environment. All of this can influence the impact of the compound on the individual. And music is also, one big component of the setting. In fact, in the psilocybin-assisted psychotherapy, they're fairly careful to select the type of music that they would play. So I would think that those mechanism maybe also in my view could be a non-invasive way to also stimulate certain neurocircuitry that then may beneficially interact with the psilocybin administration. But perhaps with some of the research that we'll be doing, you can even do that in a more targeted manner if you know what's happening. But I think there are a number of ways that this could potentially be useful.
That's so cool. Thank you for indulging my question, something that interests me. It probably interests others out there too, though. So how might your findings lead to better and safer treatments for major depression? What are some of your goals in this area?
Yeah, so our research, again, could be considered quite basic about how these drugs work and operate in the brain and what are their mechanism of action. But our long-term goal is to take some of these insights for the purpose of to advance drug discovery. So we think that, again, if we know what some of these brain circuitry are affected by some of these compounds, say psilocybin, then we might start searching for some other compound that might also act on similar circuitry and might even have some greater effects. Overall, I view depression as a very complex disorder, very complex mental illnesses. There's no, single responsible gene. There's no single responsible brain region that is causing this disorder. It's really a system-wide type of illness. So we think that these compounds also work the same way. They also seem to affect the brain on a whole, affecting multiple circuits. So by testing how they, I think, affect multiple circuits, I think we have a good chance of perhaps really tackling the problem of depression, sort of looking at it at the same level.
Yeah, the broad-based level at which it actually exists and affects people. Yeah, that's great. You're targeting the whole brain that way. So finally, looking ahead to where your research is going, what gives you hope?
So again, depression is such a debilitating disorder that affects many people. And there are many options to try to treat it right now, although none of them are very satisfactory. And medication remains, I would say, the primary option that's really the most widely used. But again, there are just a lot of current medication have a lot of side effects. Some of them are very slow to act, or they don't really cannot be a good treatment for everybody. So what gives me hope is that currently, after a long period of no kind of new drug, now we're finally starting to see some newly approved medication. So things like ketamine that was approved 3 years ago, and also brexanolone for postpartum depression. So again, also now psychedelic, it seems to also have a lot of promising results. So again, yeah, I really see a future where we might have a wider range of medications, perhaps also due to some of our research on trying to understand how these drugs work, that can then be suitable for treating different types of or subtypes of depression. So again, just a wider population can benefit from these medicines.
Fantastic. And by combining the wide array of treatments that could be available in the near future with precision diagnostics, we could create a whole precision way to treat people for their individual needs and understand what each person needs based on their biology, their experiences, and then funnel the exact right treatment to them from the get-go. That's kind of the dream, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah, I think the two part here, right? The precision diagnostic and then having the right medicine to treat. Yeah.
Well, your work is a key cornerstone of that dream, and hopefully you will be extremely successful with your Rising Star Award supported work and all your work. Thank you, Alex, for appearing with us on Brainwaves today. It's been wonderful to talk with you and learn about your work. And viewers, thank you too. If you have any questions, you may post them on onemind.org/brainwaves, where you can also find all of our past Brainwaves episodes. And also bear in mind that our music festival for brain health, where Alex will speak, is coming up on September 10th this year. Tickets are still available. You may find them and register for a ticket at music-festival.org. So please check that out. And remember, what is your brain good for? Making waves, of course. Thanks for being with us on Brainwaves today. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
My mother has had depression most of her life.
My uncle committed suicide when he was in his 30s.
I live with bipolar.
Now, more than ever, it's the world's leading cause of disability. Yet research to improve mental health lacks the attention physical health research receives. Visit onemind.org. From the lab to the front lines, accelerating brain health for all. Help us fund new treatments at onemind.org.
I'm living my best life.